Courage doesn't usually enter a person's life with dramatic music or heroic lighting. It slips in quietly, almost unnoticed. The moment you decide to tell the truth first to yourself and then to the world around you. It's the decision to acknowledge what you already know deep down, that avoiding responsibility only deepens your suffering, while facing it, even imperfectly, begins to transform you. Most people imagine courage as a grand gesture, something displayed on a battlefield or in a crisis. But the psychological reality is far more subtle. Courage starts with the smallest internal shift, the willingness to confront what you fear rather than negotiate with it. And that moment, that tiny, almost invisible moment, is where real strength is born. When you choose courage, you choose to step into territory that is unknown, unpredictable, and often uncomfortable. But that discomfort is essential, because without it, you never discover what you're capable of. Fear narrows your world. It pushes you into the shadows of your own potential, convincing you that safety is the same as peace. It's not. Safety earned by avoiding truth or responsibility is a fragile kind of safety. The slightest challenge shatters it. Courage, on the other hand, builds a foundation inside you that cannot be easily shaken. It says, I am willing to stand where I once ran. I am willing to act where I once hesitated. And here's the psychological truth. Courage doesn't arrive fully formed. You cultivate it. You shape it through repeated, deliberate choices that require honesty, discipline, and a willingness to accept the consequences of your actions. The first courageous act might be nothing more than admitting a mistake, setting a boundary, or telling someone how you truly feel. These seem like small things, but they're not. They reshape your internal world. They reorganize the chaos you've been avoiding. They turn you into someone who can handle complexity rather than someone crushed by it. Think about what happens when you refuse to act courageously. The problem you're avoiding grows. The fear you ignore gains strength. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your sense of agency diminishes. You become a passive participant in your own life, carried along by circumstances instead of shaping them. That's a slow kind of suffering, one built on the belief that you're not capable of more. But courage challenges that belief. It suggests that you can grow, that you can stretch the borders of who you are, that you can push into the unknown without collapsing. Courage also aligns with meaning. Not comfort, not ease. Meaning. Because when you take courageous action, when you confront what needs confronting, you begin to move toward a life that is more structured, more orderly, and more substantial. You become someone who can be relied upon, someone who others turn to, someone who knows, deep in their bones, that they can survive difficulty and emerge stronger for it. That's not just psychological resilience. It's the foundation of character. And in every story of transformation, whether fictional or real, it is always the first honest, courageous step that breaks the spell of fear. Once you take that step, the world begins to open. Possibilities you couldn't see before suddenly come into view. You realize that the path forward was waiting for you all along. You just had to gather the courage to walk it. So the invitation is simple. Start with one brave choice, one moment of honesty, one refusal to turn away, because that single decision has the power to reshape everything that follows. Kindness is often misunderstood in our culture. People tend to associate it with softness, with being agreeable, with stepping aside so others can move forward. But genuine kindness is something far more complex and far more demanding. It's an act of deliberate strength. It requires you to regulate your impulses, to restrain aggression when it's unnecessary, and to direct your energy towards something that makes the world slightly less chaotic than it was a moment before. And that's not an easy task. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated psychological achievements a person can develop. When you look closely, kindness is not the absence of power. It's power under control. It's the ability to act harshly, but choosing not to because you've recognized the responsibility that comes with your influence. There's a kind of discipline in that decision, a moral discipline. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can respond with anger. Anyone can escalate a conflict. That's the default setting. But choosing kindness means interrupting that automatic reaction and replacing it with intention. It asks you to pause, to consider the impact of your next move, and to take responsibility for the emotional environment you're contributing to. And that's where the real strength lies. Because kindness doesn't flourish in comfort. It reveals itself when things get difficult, when someone frustrates you, when you feel misunderstood, when life pushes you to the edge. In those moments, kindness becomes a test of character rather than a convenient gesture. And it's precisely in those situations that kindness can change the trajectory of a conversation, a relationship, or even a person's life. You don't always see the ripple effect, but it's there. People remember when someone treated them with dignity, especially when they didn't feel like they deserved it. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you practice kindness consistently. You begin to see people not merely as obstacles or competitors, but as complex beings carrying their own burdens, their own fears, their own private battles. That realization naturally softens your approach. You become more patient, more tolerant, more grounded. And ironically, that makes you stronger. Because strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about being so stable within yourself that you don't need to dominate to feel secure. At a societal level, kindness acts as a stabilizing force. It counterbalances aggression, resentment, and the endless cycle of retaliation that people fall into when they feel threatened. When you choose kindness, you introduce a moment of clarity into a system that is otherwise governed by emotional reactivity. You interrupt the spiral. You create space, psychological space for reflection, for healing, for cooperation. And that space is where progress becomes possible. But kindness should never be confused with passivity. It doesn't mean tolerating harm or sacrificing your values. In fact, the most effective kindness is anchored in strength and clarity. It draws boundaries. It speaks truth. It refuses to enable destructive behavior. Real kindness protects what is good while discouraging what is harmful. It doesn't avoid conflict. It elevates it to something more productive. So when you choose kindness, you're not choosing weakness. You're choosing the harder path, the path of restraint, understanding, and moral responsibility. And that path has the power to transform not only you, but everyone who crosses it. Because in a world filled with noise and conflict, the strongest person in the room is the one who can remain kind. Responsibility has a way of revealing a person's true character. It doesn't arrive wrapped in inspiration or excitement. It usually comes disguised as a burden, an inconvenience, or a problem no one else wants to solve. And that's exactly why it's transformative. When you step forward and accept responsibility, when you willingly take on the weight that others avoid, you begin to reorganize not only your life, but your inner world. It's in those moments that ordinary individuals cross the threshold into something resembling heroism, even if no one else recognizes it. Responsibility gives courage a direction. Without it, courage becomes random, unfocused, even reckless. But when you commit yourself to something meaningful, something that depends on your discipline, your honesty, and your effort, you give your courage a reason to exist. You anchor it. You turn it into a force capable of shaping outcomes rather than simply reacting to circumstances. And psychologically, that shift is profound. You move from being someone who waits for life to happen to someone who participates in its unfolding. There's a kind of order that responsibility creates. It brings clarity to situations that once felt chaotic. When you say, "This is mine to handle," you immediately narrow the field of possibilities. You're no longer overwhelmed by everything that could happen. You're focused on what you can do. That focus generates stability. And stability is precisely what allows people to grow. Chaos doesn't disappear, it never truly does, but responsibility gives you the strength to stand within it without being swallowed. And here's something often overlooked. Responsibility also deepens your relationships. When people know they can rely on you, trust forms naturally. Not the superficial kind, but the kind that roots itself in repeated proof. Every responsible act tells the world, "You matter. This task matters. My actions matter." And that message strengthens the social fabric in ways that simple words never could. But responsibility is not glamorous. It requires sacrifice. It forces you to confront your limitations and push past them. It asks you to handle challenges even when you're tired, even when you're unsure, even when no one is watching. Yet, the reward is equally unglamorous and far more valuable. You become someone capable of carrying weight without collapsing, someone who can be counted on when things fall apart. And in a world where many prefer to shift blame or shrink away, the person who chooses responsibility becomes rare and therefore powerful. So take responsibility not because it's easy, but because it's the fastest path to becoming someone worth depending on. Courage on its own can become harsh, and kindness without strength can drift into helplessness. But when the two are brought together, when they're balanced and integrated, they create a kind of maturity that's both rare and deeply necessary. It's the combination that allows a person to stand firm without becoming rigid, and to be gentle without being fragile. This balance isn't something you stumble into, it's something you cultivate deliberately through reflection, discipline, and repeated action. You can see the difference immediately. A person with courage but no kindness becomes dangerous, someone who pushes, dominates, or destroys because they don't temper their strength with empathy. And someone with kindness but no courage becomes invisible, someone who avoids conflict, suppresses their own needs, and slowly dissolves under the weight of other people's expectations. Neither extreme leads to a meaningful life. Both distort the self. The real goal is to develop enough courage to speak and act honestly, and enough kindness to ensure that your honesty serves something higher than your own impulse. This integration shows up in the way you carry yourself. You become someone who confronts problems directly but without cruelty. Someone who sets boundaries, not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself and for others. Someone who understands that compassion is not about protecting people from all difficulty, but about helping them face it with strength of their own. When courage and kindness work together, you become a stabilizing force. You don't just navigate challenges, you help others navigate theirs. And in a world that often swings between aggression and avoidance, the person capable of embodying both courage and kindness becomes a source of clarity, grounding, and possibility. Choose to be that person not for recognition, but because the world is better every time one human being learns to stand strong and remain kind.